Die Grenzwacht hielt im Osten dem Feinde lange stand. Heut kehrt ihr letzter Posten zurück ins Vaterland.
So I haven't posted in a while. I've been pretty busy. And so for a lot of people, that should indicate that what I have to say here, I think, is a particularly important realization that I've had. Something that I think really needs to be in the consciousness of more people. This is the subject: morality versus politics, or to what extent are they one and the same? Have you ever considered that? What we're facing up against right now, it's deeper than politics. And what do you really think when you think about the word politics? Well, politics, to pretty much everyone, it's a very dirty word. It's something that's nasty and pointless, and it makes people angry. You know, the stereotype: you don't talk about politics because that causes disagreements. Well, maybe we need disagreements also. Maybe we need to reach some better conclusions. Especially because, if you noticed, we're not talking about just budget cuts. We're not talking about some money here, some money there. We're talking about very deep things which change everything around us, which tear down everything that we love and we care about. We're talking about the changes right now that are being pushed through and have been pushed through for a very long time, which have resulted and will continue to result in complete and total changes to our system, our government system, and our very lives, consistently. So at the same time, these were all achieved through political agitation, but at the same time, they weren't necessarily framed as politics. And certainly, once a battle is significantly won in terms of the public common consciousness, the Overton window, the allowable thoughts, once that has been secured by a very controlling system, then afterwards it's no longer really considered just politics. It's then, at least in their perspective, a moral that people must believe or they are bad people. Morals, on the other hand, are a far better description of what has been done to us and what we would have as a positive vision for our future. You see, we're not just engaging in politics. We're not just engaging in the dirty word, the thing that upsets people. We're engaging in the creation, perpetuation, and hopefully the reestablishment of a genuine moral framework, not just politics. But of course, I think it's an artificial separation, politics and morals. I'll use another jumping off point that I learned from my own life, and I've kind of repeated this before, but I think it's still very useful for perspective. So when I was in architecture school, people who've been following for a while know that I work in that industry. Well, my professors again and again repeated that, yes, architecture can be political, and they thought to themselves, how can we make it political? Now, they don't have to try too hard, but I think this is very important. They are very conscious about this. In both schools that I went to, both of them required a philosophy study, and the philosophers chosen were inevitably from the Frankfurt School, radical left-wing, communist-leaning. And that's what you get in both cases. Now, were the people convinced of this? The students? Were we convinced? No, I mean, these philosophy classes were a joke to us, but at the same time, we were completely denied alternative philosophers who might have different opinions, especially the opinions that would be particularly harsh when it comes to these philosophers. If you're stuck in a sort of limbo of being a moderate, you're not really setting up any sort of actual opposition. And one of the biggest problems there is this problem of moral versus political. The idea that such philosophers were just misled. The idea that politics applied to buildings is just a mistake. Well, no. On the contrary, buildings are always reflecting some sort of moral, something that the designers and the clients have decided consciously to put into that building. What do they believe in? What do they want the surrounding people to know, to learn? And that's constantly around you, actually. Buildings are perhaps some of the most silent things. They're not going to tell you how to vote, but they are going to affect your life. They're going to tell you the values of a civilization. And if someone who does not share your values is in complete and total control of your buildings, your built environment, then they're the ones with the money who can reflect different values, who can project those different values to the surrounding people. And this is far more clear in other forms of media where you do have written things, where you do have morals repeated again and again, these ideas repeated again and again, and they might not even be phrased as political. Think about newspapers, books, movies. Everything around you can be political, but usually it's phrased as moral. And take for consideration here how it is that the word political is used as a smear. We don't want politics in our school. We don't want these political statements. So when the Black Lives Matter movement became so disgusting, so violent to so many people, that's when more and more people began to label it, strictly speaking, a political movement, while the other side opts largely not to label it a political movement where they can avoid it. They try to instead label it a moral movement. However, if we were really smart, we would have not just tried to smear it as politics, but smear it correctly as bad, wrong, morally reprehensible from the very beginning. And continuing on into this idea of schools and what schools adopt, well, what about this whole CRT thing? Oh, that's politics. That's politics inserted into school. Well, no, not exactly. I mean, it's politics in the sense of if you actually had these two different political groups actually going against each other in a meaningful way, but at the same time, it's just the continuation of this exact same moral framework, which I had to have when I was growing up and going through school. It's the exact same set of lies, except magnified to a great extent, and it's just the same biases. It's the same false narrative. It's the same false assumptions. They always assume biology as being something of non-importance, and they did when I was growing up, and they do now. It's insane, it's unhinged, and it's amoral, but you need to have the guts, of course, to say not that it's just political, but that the whole idea is amoral beginning to end. Not just that, it's anti-moral. Consider, for that matter, the moral framework which is used to perpetuate this idea of diversity, inclusion, equity, whatever words they might use. For them, this is moral. For them, this is the natural conclusion that you have to believe. Otherwise, you're not a good person. But you can see the double standard even in how they will frame it very intentionally. See, the benefits, the goodies that go towards, let's say, black people, these are moral goods. These are something that you have to believe in. You have to believe that they deserve your labor, that they deserve what you've done. They deserve this Western civilization. Give them the city, give them this building, give them this money. And in reality, this is coming from you. In reality, all these movements of the past, present, future, all of this, it's still fundamentally adversarial, and it's adversarial to you and to Western civilization, and it contributes to white erasure, consistent biological white erasure. So if you could bring that back into a moral framework, you would consider for yourself, oh wait, what if white well-being actually matters? What if our lives actually matter a little bit? Maybe then all of this history here was not okay to do. But here you see the linguistic trick. Exactly there. You have politics. It's white identity politics, which we must fight against. Something like that. And when you do that, you see they're smearing it because your interests, your well-being is political to them. Once something that is actually extremely important, fundamentally important to life itself and the continuation of life itself is made into something political, that's when it can be taken away, because politics is bad. If something were made moral instead, if something were made fundamental to our morals, then we probably wouldn't have gone this far. We probably would have said, well, it doesn't matter what stories you come to us with. It doesn't matter what inconsistencies or lies you might come up with. It doesn't matter what excuses you give us. Deliberate assaults against our well-being with intents of creating more and more white erasure to harm us ever more will not be tolerated, because our well-being is actually moral to have. And in general on this subject, I think one of the wisest things that I've ever heard about how these political movements actually work is that all these movements, all these anti-white movements, have at their center been based around getting from Western civilization. They've been about taking this. What you have worked for is on the table. What they have worked for is never on the table. And that's perhaps one of the most clear examples of this linguistic trickery. Once what you have, including your self-determination, your well-being, is on the table, then it can be politicked away. Their benefits will always be considered in their narrative as moral. Your benefits, your well-being, even your basic rights will not be. That's exactly how this whole human rights thing bizarrely works. That human rights are always these rights extracted from Western civilization. They're taken from you. If anything, these are even special benefits which are given to these others at the expense of your basic rights, your basic well-being, your continuation. Consider this concept also in movies. So often people will complain about modern movies, right? Because they've become more aware of it. They'll complain about modern movies being, oh, so political. But the truth is, these movies, people were always thinking. The creators of these movies were always thinking, what sort of morality do I want to put in my movie? What do I want to teach the audience? They always think this. It's very obvious, actually, that there's always something there. I think more so people have just started using the term politics and propaganda more and more often, not because there's not more information intentionally put into these movies, but because they have a far better sense at this point how great the threat is, and they're trying to respond to it. But again, it's not just the politics. It's our whole future. It's our way of life. It's the continuation of this life. Thought experiment here. If you had a castle, let's say you're in these olden days and you're knights in shining armor. If you have this castle and there's a horde of people attacking the castle, well, the castle walls are a separation. Probably they defend a little bit of a territory, some of the resources that are necessary to survival. Usually you have water within, a well, this kind of stuff. And this was all built up as a political unit. The creation of these walls exist for a political purpose, the perpetuation of the people within. However, one could just as easily say, very, very easily say that the continuation of these walls, the defense of these particular walls, was for this continuation, and therefore it's just moral. It's absolutely inconceivable that they would go ahead and take down their walls because it was a political thing. They wouldn't think to themselves, oh yes, let's get rid of these. And you could consider that in modern times in terms of the border. How do we enforce the border? Even if we don't have a literal wall there, the idea used to be that it was pretty inconceivable to just let people come across the border. When that was politicized, then it became something that could be taken away. Your security as a country, your perpetuation as a country could be taken away, because as soon as something is politicized, as soon as something is made into a nasty, ugly word that makes people upset, that allows people to debate a subject. If we were sensible, if we were moral, actually, a lot of these movements would be completely and absolutely out of the question. They would be something that we could not accept any argument from. It's not a matter of free speech. It would just be a matter of consciousness, of realization of threats. We would not tolerate the discussion of our well-being as politics. We wouldn't tolerate the discussion of our people becoming diminished, white erased in our countries. That would not be something acceptable to us. It simply not is a matter of politics or a subject of free speech. It's everything to us. And then finally, I want to give one last example. I think one last really crucial consideration for the encompassing language of our civilization right now, where we are, how people actually talk to each other. So when you go to church, right, they'll often say, we don't want to be political. Okay, well, question for all churchgoers, everyone. Do you believe that Christians should be moral people? Politics have impact. So if you're going to sit on your hands and be fearful, especially if you're going to be silent and tolerant, tolerance itself being a sin in the Bible, if you're going to be that way, then you're never going to take any Christian stance, not a single one, because there's such thing as moral and amoral. At least if you're a Christian, you should believe that. You're not here to be open. You're not here to just sit on the sidelines. You're not here to be a moderate or try to define, maybe the church should be a little bit more left-wing. Maybe it should be a little bit more right-wing. No, it's not the political parties. There's a fundamental truth within all this. There's actual well-being at stake. There's actual considerations for the future. And there are very hard things that you have to confront. And we are not commanded to be cowards, but this does illustrate very well how the church has been forced down a path that has changed it so much for the detriment of the people within these churches even. How would someone even make an argument within these churches that, maybe the Bible has some parts that say race mixing, biological white erasure here, is very wrong? How would you make that argument when the church just kind of steps back continually and they don't want to take a solid stand no matter what the Bible may say? They'll be tolerant when, even more consistently, tolerance is tolerance of poisons. Tolerance is tolerance of things that are notably bad. If it were not bad, you would call it just love. It would be good. It would be something good to have in your community. But tolerance is something that you instantly recognize as harmful. Does that sound like a very good thing to have? But now I know where we are. You are more than anything probably afraid. You're afraid of a system that has so much power to destroy your life at the moment. Now, what will happen to the system in the future, we can't say exactly. But what you can do right now is stop thinking in just political terms. Don't just tell people, oh, I'm a left-winger, I'm a right-winger, I'm a moderate, libertarian. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. The values that we have, at least the values on my channel, if you're watching it consistently, they're transcendent values. They're important. They're continuation. They're everything. They're values far greater than the individual. And I think that eventually we will have to progress to such a moral framework. We'll have to progress to being actually good people, actually moral and rigid, upright people, instead of the cowards who talk about politics.
Ich darf nicht länger zagen, bald zwingt sie euren Sinn, nach Ostland sie zu tragen. Sie will, sie muss dorthin. Nach Ostland sie zu tragen. Sie will, sie muss